Imagine the person you trusted most, the love of your life, shattering that trust into a million irreparable pieces. The night was still clinging to Manhattan's glittering skyline when Ambrose Blackwell, a man whose name echoed with power in the cutthroat world of real estate, slipped quietly into his penthouse. But inside his home, the air was heavy, stagnant, and colder than he had realized. His tuxedo jacket carried the faint, foreign scent of a perfume that wasn't his wife's. It was a gala overflowing with eager investors, a celebration soaked in vintage champagne, and sweetened by the intoxicating company of his mistress. He genuinely thought he was untouchable, a modern-day king at the apex of his reign. It wouldn't be from a stock market crash, but from the fragile, determined hands of the woman he had once vowed to cherish forever. Her belly was a quiet, solemn testament to broken promises, a monument to a future that suddenly felt terrifyingly uncertain. Tonight, the heavy truth had become unbearable, undeniable. She had heard the insidious whispers from friends. She had seen the cold dismissal in his eyes. But last night, when Ambrose didn't return, when the city seemed to swallow him whole, Jacqueline finally accepted the devastating reality. She was no longer the wife of his heart, only the polished keeper of his public image. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she set the papers down at his usual place at the breakfast table. This was not a love note, not a gentle, tear-stained plea. These were divorce papers, pages that carried the crushing weight of her broken trust, her unborn child, and her fractured dignity. She wasn't the naive girl from upstate New York anymore, the one who had so fervently believed in fairy tales. She was a woman scorned, and though her body was weary, her spirit was ablaze with a single, unwavering decision. She would not be silent. She would not raise her child in the suffocating shadow of betrayal. She thought of the girl she used to be. That girl had followed him into boardrooms, into late-night strategy sessions, into dreams so big they swallowed their nights whole. That girl had sacrificed pieces of herself to support him, to be the calm, steady anchor in his storm of relentless ambition. To this very morning, pregnant and emotionally abandoned, preparing to hand her husband the documents that would rip their carefully constructed world apart. Ambrose, careless in his towering arrogance, hummed to himself as he loosened his tie. He expected Jacqueline to greet him softly, to set a perfect breakfast in front of him, to pretend nothing was wrong, just as she always had. He did not see the steel that had replaced the softness in her eyes. When he entered the kitchen, he froze. For the first time in years, Ambrose felt the solid earth shift beneath his feet. She wasn't weeping. She wasn't begging. She was silent, steady, and radiating a strength he hadn't remembered she possessed. The air between them was sharp enough to cut glass. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice trembling, not with weakness, but with a tightly restrained fury. "I thought you'd like something different for breakfast today." Her hand slid the papers across the cold, marble table toward him. Ambrose blinked, his mind struggling to comprehend. Divorce papers? He forced a smirk, the kind that had charmed callous investors and disarmed powerful rivals. "Jacqueline, darling, what is this?" His words dripped with condescension, but even as he spoke them, his chest tightened with a sudden, unfamiliar dread. He recognized the calm in her eyes. It was the calm of someone who had already let go. "It's not a gesture. You broke every promise. You broke me, and now I won't let you break our child, too." The silence in the room grew unbearable. But inside the penthouse, time seemed suspended, holding its breath. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time in his carefully orchestrated life, he didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to control the narrative. She wasn't going to beg. "But you'll never have me again." But she didn't stop. She didn't look back, because she knew something he hadn't yet realized. It was happening right here, in his own kitchen, with the wife he had just lost forever. Jacqueline Blackwell had never been the type of woman people expected to end up in the glossy pages of magazines or the vicious gossip columns of Manhattan society. She wasn't raised with silver spoons or spontaneous weekends in Paris. She came from a quiet town in upstate New York, where life was measured by community fundraisers, church picnics, and the steady, comforting rhythm of small-town traditions. Her mother was a school teacher, patient and devoted, teaching more than just math or reading. She taught values, honesty, sacrifice, and compassion. She was a girl who volunteered at every charity event, who stayed up late studying by lamplight, who believed that if you worked hard enough, you could reach for the stars. Her dream was simple yet powerful. The streets roared with ambition, with people who walked fast and talked faster, with opportunities hidden around every corner. She studied economics, volunteered at charity events, and balanced 3 part-time jobs to cover the expenses her scholarship didn't. Life was exhausting, but every single step brought her closer to the woman she aspired to become. She had been working the event, gracefully serving hors d'oeuvres to wealthy donors. He was tall, confident, laughing easily among men twice his age. He looked like someone who was born to win. For Jacqueline, who had never believed herself particularly glamorous or worldly, his focused attention was intoxicating. For once, she felt seen, not as the poor scholarship girl, not as the waitress balancing plates, but as a woman with dreams worth listening to. Their courtship was a breathtaking whirlwind. Jacqueline was swept into a world she had only ever glimpsed from a great distance. This was what it took to succeed. By the time she graduated, she was not just Ambrose's girlfriend, she was his indispensable partner. She helped him draft business proposals, listened to his anxieties, and celebrated his victories as if they were her own. But the truth was, Jacqueline had also made sacrifices, silent ones, the kind women so often make in the name of love. She convinced herself that it was all temporary, that her own dreams could wait, that building Ambrose's empire together was enough for now. His wealth grew exponentially. Yet she never lost her inherent softness. But behind closed doors, the cracks began to form. Jacqueline believed him because she wanted to, because love, even when it's bruised, clings desperately to hope. But the reality was much, much harsher. Each small betrayal cut deeper than the last, until she could no longer ignore what was happening right in front of her. She remembered her mother's words, "Never let anyone decide your worth, not even the man you love." She had finally chosen her child. What Ambrose didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jacqueline was stronger than she had ever been. Because beneath her grief, Jacqueline carried a secret, a piece of knowledge that would turn Ambrose's carefully constructed empire completely upside down. And he would soon learn that betraying her was the most costly mistake of his entire life. The Blackwell penthouse was more than a home. From the living room, you could see the flashing, chaotic lights of Times Square, the ceaseless stream of traffic on Fifth Avenue, and the glittering Hudson River in the distance. Every single inch of the space had been meticulously designed to impress. Chandeliers imported from Italy sparkled like captured constellations. The palace of a man who had conquered New York's brutal real estate game. For her, the penthouse was a gilded cage. She remembered the first time she moved in right after their wedding. She had been just as dazzled as everyone else. She ran her fingers along the rich velvet drapes, laughed at the absurd size of the walk-in closet, and thought she had finally arrived at the life she had once only dreamed about. The profound silence of the massive rooms became suffocating. The grand dining table, meant for 16 guests, was almost always set for 2, and more often than not, she ate completely alone. The penthouse had different layers, each one reflecting Ambrose's insatiable hunger for power. The lower level was designed for entertaining, featuring a wine cellar stocked with rare vintages, a library filled with priceless first editions, and a private theater where he hosted screenings for influential investors. It contained their bedroom, a spa-like bathroom with a tub carved from a single block of Italian stone, and a nursery in progress, decorated with soft creams and pale blues. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves displayed countless awards and framed magazine covers bearing his confident face. Jacqueline often avoided that room. It wasn't just an office. The penthouse had no trace of her touch. Sometimes she wondered if he had ever truly seen her, or if she had simply been another beautiful accessory to his meteoric rise. The city outside celebrated Ambrose as a man of vision, a builder of dreams. But inside his own home, he had built a prison for his wife. But those precious moments had faded, replaced by endless business dinners, whispered phone calls, and nights when Ambrose didn't come home at all. That morning, as she slid the divorce papers across the kitchen table, Jacqueline couldn't help but glance around the space one last time. The cold marble counters, the gleaming stainless steel appliances, the vase of fresh lilies Ambrose had ordered through his assistant. Not for her, of course, but for appearances. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. A stranger walking in might think they were the happiest couple in Manhattan. But Jacqueline knew the devastating truth. That was his true setting. Not at home with her, but out there, where ambition and temptation blurred into one intoxicating cocktail. And yet, Jacqueline realized the setting that had once made her feel so small could now become her weapon. He had built his entire empire on perception, on the illusion of being invincible, untouchable, and adored. But illusions are fragile. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the iconic skyline through the window. Because this setting, this luxurious, cold, glittering cage, wasn't just the backdrop of her humiliation. And as Ambrose stood frozen at the table, staring at the divorce papers, he had no idea that the walls of the very penthouse he adored were about to bear witness to the complete unraveling of his empire. To the world, he was the definition of a self-made tycoon, born with nothing, rising through sheer grit, charm, and a relentless hunger for more. He had built a real estate empire worth billions before turning 40. His name was whispered with reverence in boardrooms from Wall Street to Hong Kong. To journalists, he was a story that sold itself. But to Jacqueline, Ambrose was something else entirely, an illusion. The man she had once adored, who had wooed her with candlelight dinners and whispered dreams of the future, was no longer there. He had begun to treat life like one of his business deals. Calculate the risk, maximize the gain, and discard what no longer served him. Unfortunately, Jacqueline and their unborn child had become just another liability in his cold, calculating eyes. Ambrose loved the spotlight. Among them, one figure stood out, Cassandra Ward. Cassandra was everything Jacqueline was not, at least in the shallow terms that Ambrose now valued. But convenience had nothing to do with it. Cassandra knew exactly how to flatter him, how to stroke his ego until he felt completely invincible. To society, Cassandra was just another pretty face attached to a powerful man. But behind closed doors, she wielded significant influence. She laughed at all his jokes, told him he was the smartest man she'd ever met, and reminded him at every opportunity that he was still young, still desirable, still unstoppable. She was poison disguised as champagne, bubbly, intoxicating, and lethal in the long run. Jacqueline had heard her name long before she ever saw her. Rumors in high society circles traveled with lightning speed. Ambrose Blackwell's new protégé, they called her, though everyone knew what that really meant. Jacqueline, humiliated but determined to preserve her dignity, ignored the whispers for as long as she possibly could. Ambrose himself didn't even try to hide it anymore. He strutted through the penthouse like nothing was wrong, his cologne tinged with the scent of another woman's perfume. That arrogance was his ultimate downfall. Jacqueline, swollen with the child they had created together, waiting alone in a cavernous penthouse, while Ambrose lounged in VIP booths with Cassandra, her loud laughter ringing in his ear. He convinced himself that as long as he provided for her financially, he owed her nothing else. She paraded herself at his side in glittering sequin gowns, getting photographed at charity events, whispering promises of a glamorous future that Jacqueline could never compete with. She was bold where Jacqueline was gentle, reckless where Jacqueline was careful, and shallow where Jacqueline was profound. But Cassandra wasn't in love. She was strategic. She knew Ambrose's weaknesses, his ego, his desperate need for validation, his deep-seated fear of growing old and irrelevant. She fed those weaknesses daily, ensuring that he stayed hooked. He was a man with connections, wealth, and power and opportunity wrapped in expensive suits. But in truth, he was the prey. He was chasing the illusion of youth, completely blind to the wife at home, whose quiet strength outshone any mistress's cheap charm. In private, Ambrose began to speak of Jacqueline with contempt. "I need excitement." Cassandra smiled when she heard such words. Every insult toward Jacqueline only cemented her own influence. "You deserve someone who matches your energy," she purred. While he was out flaunting his mistress, Jacqueline was preparing her own quiet, devastating revenge. The antagonists of this story, Ambrose and Cassandra, believed they were writing the script. They believed Jacqueline was a background character, destined to simply fade away. But what they failed to understand was that true power often lies in silence. And when that silence finally breaks, it does so with the force of an earthquake. Ambrose returned home that morning feeling smug, convinced that the world was still held firmly in his palm. Cassandra had kissed him goodbye, promising another secret rendezvous, another night of reckless pleasure. He thought nothing could possibly shake him. The morning Jacqueline handed Ambrose the divorce papers was only the beginning. Betrayal in private was painful, but betrayal in public was devastating. And for Jacqueline, that moment came faster than she ever expected. 2 weeks after that fateful breakfast, the Blackwells were scheduled to appear at one of Manhattan's most glamorous events, the Metropolitan Charity Gala. The Blackwells had been on the guest list for years, always arriving arm in arm, the perfect picture of elegance and power. Jacqueline dreaded it now, but appearances still mattered, and Ambrose insisted they go. He framed it as an obligation. "Investors will be there," he told her, adjusting his cufflinks in front of the mirror. "We need to show unity." His voice carried the unshakable arrogance of a man who still believed he controlled the entire narrative. She would go, not as his accessory, but as his equal. The night of the gala, the grand hall glittered with breathtaking excess. Waiters carried silver trays of champagne, and a string quartet played beneath an arch of cascading crystal. Jacqueline wore a gown of deep emerald silk that hugged her figure, her belly now a soft, proud curve beneath the luxurious fabric. She chose it deliberately, a silent reminder that she carried not just the weight of betrayal, but also the promise of a new life. Ambrose, in his custom tuxedo, looked every bit the conquering tycoon. To the cameras, he smiled broadly, holding Jacqueline's arm and whispering staged compliments into her ear. For a fleeting moment, Jacqueline thought perhaps he finally understood the importance of keeping up appearances. She stood near the silent auction tables, draped in scarlet sequins, her lips curved in a smile that was anything but innocent. Conversations faltered as people noticed her. Everyone knew who she was. But seeing her there, bold as daylight, was something else entirely. She had endured enough humiliation in private. He greeted acquaintances, laughed too loudly, and glanced toward Cassandra with the shocking arrogance of a man who thought no one could ever touch him. Cameras flashed. "Meet the brilliant woman helping to shape this project, Cassandra Ward." Investors exchanged uneasy glances. And Jacqueline, pregnant and dignified, sat in the front row, her face illuminated by the same harsh lights that glorified her husband's betrayal. The sheer cruelty of it stole her breath. For years, she had been the one supporting him behind the scenes, drafting his speeches, soothing his nerves, smiling at events while hiding her own profound loneliness. And now, in front of all of Manhattan's elite, he discarded her for another woman as though she were completely irrelevant. She felt the hot burn of humiliation as eyes turned toward her, some filled with pity, others with cold judgment. A society matron whispered too loudly, "Poor Jacqueline." But Jacqueline refused to crumble. She clasped her clutch tighter, lifted her chin, and forced her tears back. If Ambrose thought this moment would break her, he was devastatingly wrong. When the presentation ended, the applause was scattered and uncertain. He grinned, convinced he had made a bold statement of power, but in reality, he had made a public spectacle of his own disgrace. As the night unfolded, the whispers grew louder. "Did you see? She was not the one who was embarrassed." Later, as guests mingled near the champagne fountain, Jacqueline excused herself from the table. She walked gracefully through the crowd, her gown brushing against the polished marble floors. For the first time, a sliver of doubt crept in. Perhaps he realized then that Jacqueline's silence was not submission. The city buzzed around her, indifferent to her pain, yet strangely liberating. And as Jacqueline disappeared into the Manhattan night, Ambrose had no idea that the headlines awaiting him would mark the beginning of his spectacular downfall. Humiliation clung to her like a second skin. All those people, the whispers, the camera sit all replayed in her mind like a cruel, endless film. The driver asked softly if she wanted to go home. That penthouse wasn't a home anymore. As soon as she stepped inside, the crushing silence crashed down on her. The crystal chandelier above glimmered mockingly, as if to remind her that she was trapped in a palace of betrayal. For weeks, she had fought to stay composed, to hide her pain behind polite smiles and steady words. But now, the dam finally broke. Her body shook, her chest heaved, and for the first time since Ambrose's betrayal, she allowed herself to completely fall apart. It wasn't just the public humiliation. It was everything. The years of sacrifice, the gnawing loneliness, the way she had abandoned her own dreams to build his. The moments she told herself to stay silent for the sake of peace, the hundreds of nights she fell asleep alone while he was out chasing glory. Every painful memory rushed back like a flood, drowning her in grief. Jacqueline thought about her parents, about the values they had so carefully instilled in her. They had raised her to be strong, to endure, to always hold her head high. But in this moment, she felt like she had failed them, and failed herself. She thought about the girl she used to be, the one who dreamed of making a real difference in the world. Where had that girl gone? Somewhere along the way, she had buried her under layers of compromise and sacrifice until only Ambrose's shadow remained. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Headlines screamed across the screen. Mistress takes center stage. Pregnant wife watches in silence. The end of the Blackwell fairy tale. Jacqueline turned the phone face down, unable to bear reading another single word. Her chest ached, her pulse pounded in her ears, and despair clawed at her throat. She dragged herself to the nursery, a place that had once filled her with so much hope. I don't know if I'm strong enough. What if Ambrose took everything? She barely ate. She wandered the penthouse in a silent daze, haunted by memories of a love that no longer existed. Every corner reminded her of Ambrose. His laughter in the office, his cologne lingering in the bedroom, the way he used to hold her hand at the balcony railing, pointing out constellations. Friends called. She ignored them. But Jacqueline couldn't bear the thought of facing anyone. The city that had once filled her with such awe now seemed to mock her. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her reflection staring back at her, pale, tired, and broken. Her breakdown reached its peak the night she discovered Ambrose had given Cassandra one of her necklaces, a delicate sapphire pendant that had been a wedding gift from her parents. She saw the photo online. It was in that moment, at her absolute lowest point, that something inside her finally shifted. She couldn't keep drowning while Ambrose thrived. Jacqueline wiped her tears, though her hands still trembled. She wasn't ready yet. A spark that whispered of survival, of strength, of transformation. And as she sat there in the dark, clutching her belly, Jacqueline had no idea that an unexpected ally was about to step into her life and ignite that spark into a roaring fire. She sat up slowly, one hand on her belly, and whispered to the quiet room, I will not let him destroy me. Her phone buzzed again. The voice on the other end startled her. Daniel had once been a shy, studious boy who had admired her from afar. I won't pretend to know all the details, but if you need someone in your corner, someone you can trust, I'm here. For weeks, she had felt utterly and completely alone. Now, for the first time, someone was offering support without judgment. "Daniel," she whispered, "I don't even know where to begin. Everything Ambrose has done, everything you've endured. Don't hold back. I'll handle the rest." Jacqueline hesitated. Years of practicing silence and self-preservation had made her cautious. But something in Daniel's tone, steady, kind, certain, broke down her carefully constructed walls. She told him everything. The loneliness, the mistress, the public humiliation at the gala, the necklace stolen from her past. By the time she finished, her voice shook with sheer exhaustion. "Jacqueline, you're stronger than you think. And Ambrose may have power, but he's not untouchable." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've seen whispers and legal filings, loopholes, shady partnerships. If he pushes you into a divorce without fairness, those secrets could easily surface." Her heart pounded in her chest. For so long, she had felt like the weaker one, the discarded wife. Now, for the first time, she saw the possibility of standing on equal ground. He visited the penthouse, helping her gather documents, patiently reviewing contracts Ambrose had once asked her to sign without any explanation. In her old journals, she had scribbled notes from conversations, things Ambrose had let slip late at night when he thought she wasn't really listening. Each scrap of information became valuable now. One evening, as they sat in the nursery surrounded by towering piles of papers, Daniel leaned back in his chair. "Jacqueline, do you realize what you have here? If Ambrose tries to take everything from you, you can dismantle his entire image. You hold the match that could set his whole empire on fire." Jacqueline stared at the pile of evidence, her pulse racing. For years, Ambrose had made her feel invisible. While he dismissed her, she had quietly absorbed details, patterns, and mistakes he thought went completely unnoticed. The idea terrified her. She wasn't a fighter by nature. "You don't have to become him to beat him." His words settled in her heart like a promise. She wasn't becoming Ambrose. The woman her parents had raised. The woman she had buried for so long beneath sacrifice. Jacqueline began to change. She carried herself differently, her shoulders straighter, her gaze sharper. The woman who had crumbled on the nursery floor was gone. "I see you as the woman I always admired, even back in college. You were a light then, and you're a light now, even when you don't see it." She had been invisible to Ambrose for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. Still, Jacqueline knew she had to tread carefully. It was on survival. Yet, Daniel's steady presence gave her strength in ways she hadn't expected. He reminded her of the girl she used to be. The more Ambrose flaunted his affair, the more determined Jacqueline became. She no longer cried when she saw his name in headlines alongside Cassandra's. Instead, she saw them for what they were, distractions, smoke, and mirrors. It challenged her. What neither of them knew was that Ambrose had already sensed the shift, and he was preparing a vicious countermove that would test Jacqueline's newfound courage more than ever before. Slowly but surely, Jacqueline Blackwell was shedding the fragile shell Ambrose had forced her into, and something new, something infinitely stronger, was emerging. She visited a salon for the first time in months, allowing a top stylist to restore the soft chestnut waves of her hair. Daniel noticed it, too. When he arrived at the penthouse one afternoon, briefcase in hand, he paused, visibly struck by the sight of her. "You look powerful," he said softly. "I have to be," she replied, "for both of us." It was a mental and spiritual rebirth. For weeks, Daniel had been guiding her through intense strategy sessions, teaching her how to control a narrative, how to face Ambrose without an ounce of fear. "I am enough." Jacqueline had debated not attending after the raw humiliation at the gala. "People need to see you," he said. The whispers began, but this time, she didn't shrink from them. She walked with an effortless grace, her posture flawless, her gaze steady. Some faces softened with sympathy, while others hardened with envy. But all of them watched her, completely riveted. When approached by reporters, Jacqueline did not flinch. "Mrs. Blackwell, how are you handling the rumors about your husband?" one of them asked bluntly. She smiled faintly, her voice calm and collected. Within hours, it was quoted across tabloids and blogs. For the first time since her public humiliation, Jacqueline wasn't painted as the broken wife. She was painted as dignified, composed, and utterly unshakable. Ambrose, of course, noticed. That evening, he stormed into the penthouse, his face red with fury. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Undermining me in front of the press?" Jacqueline stood calmly at the kitchen counter, sipping a cup of tea. "I didn't undermine you," she replied coolly. "I spoke the truth." Her calmness infuriated him more than her anger ever could. He slammed his hand against the hard marble countertop. "You think you're so clever now? You think anyone cares about you without me?" Jacqueline met his glare without flinching. "They don't care about me because of you, Ambrose. They care because they see strength, something you've forgotten how to have." For the first time, Ambrose faltered. He saw it then, the undeniable spark in her eyes, the steel in her tone. She wasn't the obedient woman he had so callously discarded. She was something else now, something he could no longer control. Jacqueline's transformation extended beyond society events and tense confrontations. She began volunteering again, reconnecting with her roots. She visited women's shelters, donating resources quietly, and listening to stories of survival that mirrored her own. Each conversation reminded her that she wasn't alone, that countless women had endured betrayal and rebuilt their lives from the ground up. Their strength fueled hers. Their resilience mirrored her own journey. The press took notice. The headlines shifted dramatically. Jacqueline Blackwell rises from scandal with grace. Betrayed but unbroken. Blackwell wife leads with dignity. A new symbol of strength in New York society. Ambrose seethed with rage. He had spent years meticulously crafting his image as the invincible mogul. And now his wife, pregnant, betrayed, and radiant, was stealing the spotlight. Cassandra urged him to tighten his control. "You can't let her outshine you," she hissed. "People need to know who holds the real power." But Ambrose was beginning to realize that power was slipping through his fingers, no matter how tightly he clutched. Meanwhile, Jacqueline's confidence bloomed in unexpected ways. She began speaking with investors Ambrose had neglected, listening to their frustrations, and offering empathy where he only offered arrogance. Many were shocked at her insight, her uncanny ability to recall details from conversations years past. She was no longer the silent wife in the background. She was becoming a player in her own right. Daniel watched with immense pride. "You don't even realize it, do you?" he said one evening as they reviewed documents. "You're not just surviving, Jacqueline. You're leading." Jacqueline looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I don't want to lead his world," she admitted. "I want to build my own." That statement marked the true turning point. Jacqueline began sketching ideas for her own foundation, one dedicated to helping women and children navigate betrayal and start rebuilding. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about transformation. She wanted her pain to become her purpose, her scars to become a source of strength for others. But even as she rose, she knew the storm wasn't over. Ambrose wasn't the type of man to accept defeat quietly, and Cassandra, with her insatiable hunger for status, wouldn't go down without a fight. The battlefield was shifting, but the war was far from done. Still, for the first time in months, Jacqueline felt the exhilarating fire of possibility. She wasn't merely reacting to betrayal anymore. She was rewriting the script. The woman who once crumbled in silence was gone. In her place stood a mother, a fighter, a survivor who had finally discovered her voice. And as Jacqueline prepared to step into her new role, she had no idea that her greatest chance for revenge and her greatest test of strength would come on the very same stage Ambrose once used to humiliate her. The night of reckoning came in the same way humiliation had come to Jacqueline, under the blinding glow of chandeliers, in front of flashing cameras, with all of Manhattan society watching. It was the annual Blackwell Foundation Gala, an event Ambrose himself had created years earlier to solidify his image as a great philanthropist. Ironically, this time it would become the very stage that undid him. Jacqueline had debated whether she was ready. Could she really face him? Face Cassandra? Face the same crowd that once pitted her? But as she stood before her mirror that evening, smoothing the soft fabric of her ivory gown, she realized she wasn't walking into this battle for herself alone. She was walking in for every woman who had ever been silenced, discarded, or humiliated. She was walking in for her child, and for her future. Daniel met her in the lobby, his expression softening when he saw her. "You're radiant," he said. She gave a small, steady smile, taking a deep breath. "Tonight," she whispered, "I stopped being his shadow." The gala pulsed with sheer extravagance. Violins swelled, champagne flowed, and diamonds glittered beneath the enormous chandeliers. Ambrose was already there, with Cassandra at his side in a gown of blood-red silk. They posed for photographs, smiling as if they owned the entire night. Ambrose's arrogance was unshaken. He truly believed the narrative was still his to control. But when Jacqueline entered, the entire room shifted. Conversations faltered. Cameras swung toward her. And a hush fell over the crowd like a heavy wave. She glided in, radiant and poised, her hand resting protectively on her belly. Gasps filled the grand hall. This was no broken wife. This was a woman transformed. Ambrose's smile froze on his face. Cassandra's lips curled into a smirk, but her eyes betrayed a sudden unease. Jacqueline didn't even acknowledge them. She walked straight past, commanding the attention of the crowd with her grace alone. Daniel guided her toward the stage, where she was scheduled to give a speech Ambrose had arrogantly assumed would be routine and ceremonial. But Jacqueline had rewritten it from scratch. When she took the podium, the entire audience leaned forward in anticipation. Her voice was clear and strong, carrying across the glittering room. "Good evening," she began. "Tonight we gather for the Blackwell Foundation Gala, a tradition meant to honor compassion, dignity, and truth. But tonight, I will not deliver the speech my husband expected. Tonight, I will speak my truth." A ripple of shock moved through the audience. Ambrose shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw tightening. Cassandra's nails dug into his arm. Jacqueline continued, "Many of you know me as Ambrose Blackwell's wife. For years, that was my role. Standing silently at his side, smiling for photographs, hosting dinners, managing our home. But behind the glitter, behind the polished marble walls of our penthouse, there was another story. A story of betrayal, of humiliation, of sacrifice unseen." Gasps echoed through the room. Cameras flashed relentlessly. Ambrose shot to his feet, hissing, "Jacqueline, that's enough." But she raised her hand, her eyes locking on his with a calm that silenced him more effectively than shouting ever could. She turned back to the audience. "I was betrayed not just as a wife, but as a woman who gave up her own dreams to build someone else's. Betrayed in private, and finally, betrayed in public. You all saw it. You all whispered. And I carried the weight of that silence all alone. The hall was so quiet, the chandeliers seemed to hum. Jacqueline's voice grew even steadier. But silence is no longer my choice. I will not be invisible. I will not be discarded, and I will not allow my child to inherit shame instead of dignity." At that, she gestured toward Daniel, who handed her a folder. She opened it, holding up the damning evidence they had gathered, documents, contracts, financial records. "For too long, this empire has been built on an illusion. But illusions crack, and tonight, I choose truth. The large screens behind her lit up with projections. Contracts showing Ambrose's unethical business dealings, images of Cassandra flaunting stolen jewelry, timelines that aligned his mysterious absences with fraudulent business trips. The crowd gasped louder with every new slide. Investors muttered angrily. Journalists scribbled furiously in their notepads. Cameras clicked with a machine gun-like intensity. Ambrose lunged forward. "This is slander," he shouted, his voice cracking. "None of this means anything." But Jacqueline's voice cut through the chaos like a knife. "It means everything, Ambrose, because the world deserves to know the man behind the mask. And I deserve to reclaim my voice." The audience erupted, not with pity this time, but with thunderous applause. Women rose to their feet, clapping, nodding, with tears in their eyes. Men who had once envied Ambrose now whispered furiously among themselves, finally realizing the emperor had no clothes. Ambrose stood frozen, his face pale, sweat forming at his temples. Cassandra tried to pull him back, but the photographers swarmed them, their lenses capturing every single crack in his composure. The empire he had spent years constructing was unraveling, thread by thread, under the immense weight of his wife's truth. Jacqueline stepped down from the podium, the applause still echoing around her. Daniel took her hand, steadying her as she walked past Ambrose. "You thought I would just disappear. But you forgot, Ambrose." And with that, she walked away, leaving him standing in the ruins of his life before the entire city. The aftermath of the gala spread like wildfire. Blackwell Empire shaken by wife's revelation. Jacqueline Blackwell exposes husband's betrayal in front of elite. From humiliation to heroine, the rise of Jacqueline. Government officials announced investigations into his business practices, spurred by the very evidence Jacqueline had revealed. And Jacqueline, she was finally free. The divorce proceedings, guided by Daniel's steady hand, ended swiftly and decisively. Ambrose tried to fight, but the evidence stacked against him left him completely cornered. It was defined by dignity. For the first time in years, she walked through the marble halls of her home without feeling like a prisoner. The silence was no longer suffocating, it was peaceful. She spoke at events not as Ambrose's former wife, but as Jacqueline Blackwell, a woman who had endured, fought, and risen. Each letter strengthened her resolve, proving that her pain had not been wasted. Daniel stood at the back of the room, watching quietly, his gaze filled with unmistakable pride. "But I was wrong. And I want every woman in this room, every woman who has ever been told she is not enough, to hear me clearly. You are defined by your strength, your resilience, and your choice to rise." She named him Gabriel, after her grandfather, a man who had taught her the value of honor and courage. Holding him in her arms, she felt a profound peace she had long forgotten. He never tried to replace what she had lost. The man who once believed himself untouchable was reduced to whispers of pity. His downfall was entirely of his own making. Her silence toward him was not weakness, it was closure. Years later, when Gabriel was old enough to ask about his father, Jacqueline answered with honesty, but without bitterness. "Your father made mistakes," she said softly. The transformation of Jacqueline Blackwell became more than just a story. And as she stood one evening on her balcony, the skyline glittering before her, Gabriel asleep peacefully inside, she allowed herself a genuine smile. The city that once mocked her now felt like a companion, pulsing with the same resilience she had discovered in herself. She whispered into the night, a promise for her child, for herself, and for every woman still struggling in the shadows. All right, my wonderful friends, so the story has come to an end. Maybe it's the powerful reminder that no matter how deep the betrayal, healing is always possible. Her fall did not define her. Your pain can become your power, and your scars can be the map to someone else's survival. If this story resonated with you, do me a huge favor.